What is self-confidence? Is it an inborn trait, or can it be developed? And why are some people confident in themselves, although they have a lot of shortcomings, and others, with many advantages, feel extremely insecure in society? In this story we will consider these questions, as self-confidence directly affects the quality of our lives. We will also give 8 rules or tips that will help you to reconsider your attitude to this concept. We hope that this narrative will be useful even for those who do not have problems with self-confidence. So what is self-confidence? From the point of view of psychology, self-confidence is a property of a person, the essence of which is a positive assessment of their own skills, abilities, as well as in the understanding that they are enough to achieve significant goals and meet all the needs of a person. At the same time, self-confidence should be distinguished from self-confidence. Self-confidence is an unreasonable confidence in the absence of disadvantages and negative character traits, which inevitably leads to negative consequences. Therefore, when saying about someone that he is self-confident, people, most often, have a negative connotation in mind. So, self-confidence is bad, and self-confidence is not only good, but also necessary for a full life of any person. Researchers have found that for the formation of self-confidence is important not so much objective life success, it is social status, income level, etc., and important in the formation of self-confidence is a personal positive assessment of the results of a person's own actions. That is, self-confidence is regulated not by external factors, although they can have a certain influence, but exclusively by our inner self-consciousness. This is the most important idea that must be internalized before starting to work on self-esteem and self-confidence. Some may say, how can I be confident in myself if I have nothing to buy new shoes or clothes with, let alone go on vacation abroad? What kind of confidence can we talk about if I was born into a poor family and could not study properly? Despite the seeming fairness of such questions, these factors cannot have a decisive influence on the presence or absence of self-confidence. There are a lot of evidence of this. There are many famous and wealthy people who, while apparently successful, are extremely insecure, and therefore live in constant depression. There are also many people who were born in very modest conditions, but their self-confidence and decent self-esteem are impressive and help them to achieve great success in life. The fact that your self-confidence depends only on yourself clearly shows the example of a child who has just learned to walk. He knows that there are adults who walk on 2 legs. He may have an older brother who also walks for a long time, but he himself for a year of his life only crawled. And here everything depends on the psychology of the child. How quickly he can accept the fact that he can not only walk, but it is much more convenient and faster and better in all respects. When the brother of the author of this article learned to walk, he could not accept this fact. If Mom took him by the hand, then he walked calmly. Then Mom started to give him only one finger, holding on to which he walked bravely. One day, instead of a finger, they put a stick in his palm. The baby, thinking that it was his mother's finger, calmly began to walk and walked quite a long distance. But as soon as he noticed that in fact his mother was far behind, he collapsed to the ground in fear. It turns out that the ability to walk was in him, and all the necessary conditions for it too. The only thing that prevented him from doing it was his lack of self-confidence. So, the first thing to grasp is that self-confidence is a way of thinking. It is a kind of skill, which, if desired, can be developed or vice versa, extinguished. Surely you yourself can give examples of classmates or acquaintances who during their schooling were active and self-confident, but grew up in a rather complex and insecure people. On the contrary, those who were modest and insecure, having grown up, became self-sufficient and self-confident. In short, if you have understood the simple idea that self-confidence is not an innate property that you either have or you don't have, but a dynamic thing that you can and should work on, then you can move on to the second point. Realizing that all people are alike is the best way to develop healthy self-confidence. For example, you come to your boss with a request, or you need to negotiate with an important person. You don't know how your conversation will turn out, how successfully it may end, and what impression you will have afterward. So, in order not to experience false uncertainty and the subsequent wrong line of behavior, try to imagine this person in everyday life. Imagine that he is not in a strict suit, but in shabby home pants, on his head is not a perfect hairstyle, and sloppily sticking hair, and instead of expensive perfume from him smells like garlic. After all, we are, in fact, if you take away all the tinsel, which some people hide behind quite skillfully, are extremely similar to each other. And that important person sitting in front of you may well be experiencing exactly the same thing, but he just doesn't show it. I remember a time when I had to talk to the CEO of a medical company. He looked like a very confident person and carried himself accordingly. However, since it was an unpleasant incident, I noticed his hands were shaking uncontrollably with excitement. At the same time, there was not the slightest sign of excitement on his face. When the situation was resolved, his hands stopped shaking. This was a pattern I observed in him more than once. So the first time I saw him trying to hide his excitement, I realized that he was just as worried about the outcome of the case as I was. This gave me so much confidence that I was able to quickly orient myself to the situation and come up with a solution that was best for both sides. I would hardly have been able to do this if it hadn't been for the accidentally realized fact that this CEO, who heads a not insignificant company, is exactly the same person as me, with all the weaknesses and shortcomings. The third point states that you can do anything. The Roman emperor and philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said a brilliant phrase: if something is beyond your power, do not decide that it is altogether impossible for man. But, if something is possible for a man and is peculiar to him, then consider that it is available to you as well. I must say that this phrase has inspired and supported me more than once. Indeed, if someone else can do something, why can't I do it? For example, you go to a job interview as a job seeker. Naturally, you are worried and feel some uncertainty, because there are several other applicants for the position besides you. If you manage to realize that anything that all the applicants present can do, you can do, then, all things being equal, you will be able to get the necessary self-confidence and demonstrate it at the interview, which will certainly give you an advantage over other, less self-confident candidates. It's also worth remembering the words of one of the greatest inventors in history, Thomas Edison: genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. The fourth point says don't look for blame. When talking about insecurity, for some reason many people try to find the cause of it from the outside. Typically, such people blame parents who didn't develop adequate self-esteem in them, an environment that didn't influence them in the best way, and many more. However, this is a colossal mistake. If you want to become a confident person, learn the rule once and for all: do not blame anyone for your failures. Looking for someone to blame for being an insecure person is not only pointless, but harmful. After all, it contradicts the well-founded assertion that self-confidence is not regulated by external factors, although they may have some influence, but by our inner self-consciousness. Just accept your current situation as a given, and use it as a starting point in your development. The fifth point states, don't make excuses. This is also an extremely important rule for building self-confidence. People who are weak and insecure often make excuses that look pathetic and ridiculous. If you have made a mistake or a misstep, or maybe even outright stupidity, don't try to gloss over it with silly excuses. Only a strong and self-confident person can admit his mistake or failure. Moreover, according to Paretto's law, only 20% of efforts give 80% of the result. As a very simple test, think back to the last time you were late for a meeting. If it was your fault, did you make any excuses or not? A confident person is more likely to simply apologize and admit that he or she was not entirely responsible than to start making up accidents, broken alarm clocks, and other force majeure situations to justify his or her lateness. The sixth point says don't compare. This point is quite difficult to fulfill, but it is no less important than the previous rules. The fact is that we, one way or another, constantly compare ourselves with someone. And this often has very negative consequences. Comparing yourself to someone else is not worth it, if only because most people skillfully play the role of successful and accomplished individuals. In fact, it is an illusion, in which many people live voluntarily. What is only worth social networks, in which everyone is happy and rich? This is especially sad when you know the real state of affairs of a particular person who creates a successful virtual image. Realizing this, you should also understand the stupidity of comparing yourself with the fictitious image of your friend or girlfriend. The 7th point says, concentrate on the positive. Every person has friends and enemies. Of course, not necessarily in the literal sense. But there are certainly people who love and appreciate you, and those who just don't perceive you. This is a natural situation, but to develop self-confidence, you need to learn to focus your attention on those who appreciate you. For example, you are speaking to an audience of 40 people, of which 20 are friendly and 20 are negative. So, if in the process of speaking you think about 20 conditional enemies, you will probably start to feel discomfort and insecurity, with all its consequences. On the contrary, looking into the eyes of people located to you, you will feel calm and confident in their abilities, which will certainly serve you a powerful support. In other words, someone will always like you, and someone will always dislike you. Who to focus your attention on is up to you. As Mark Twain said, avoid those who try to undermine your self-confidence. This trait is characteristic of shallow people. A great man, on the contrary, instills in you the feeling that you can accomplish a lot. The 8th point says to write down your accomplishments. As the last point, I chose to write down my accomplishments. The thing is that I personally have never used this technique for lack of need, but I have heard many times that it has helped many people. Its essence is quite simple. Every day write down in a separate notebook your achievements for the day. The most significant achievements for a longer period of time record on a separate sheet. Then you should regularly review these records to remind yourself of small and large victories, which will certainly have a positive impact on your self-esteem and self-confidence. So, to become a confident person, you should follow the following rules. Realize that self-confidence is a way of thinking and not an innate trait. Accept the fact that all people are similar to each other, with all the weaknesses and shortcomings. Realize that if something is possible for a person and is peculiar to him, it is available to you. Do not blame anyone for your failures. Not to make excuses for mistakes, but to be able to recognize them. Do not compare yourself to others. Concentrate on those who appreciate you. Record your accomplishments.